the ringing telephone proved an unwelcome distraction from my contemplations on the Second World War. My wife of 10 years was absent for a fortnight, attending an annual conference. My wife has a strong aversion to all things military, whereas I am a keen enthusiast of the Second World War. I possess the entire corpus of war films ever made, and thus to facilitate my own convenience, I only view them when she is otherwise engaged. I typically view them when she is attending a bachelorette party or engaged in Saturday shopping with her friend Amanda. However, twice a year she is obliged to absent herself for an extended period. In August, she is required to travel to Indianapolis for a period of 2 weeks to attend corporate meetings and training sessions. In February, she is required to attend the general meeting of the company, which this year was held in Houston. The meeting is a highly exclusive event, attended only by the top 10 workers in each state. Joy has been attending this meeting for the past 3 years. Last year, she called me on a Sunday and informed me that I was to pack my suitcase and meet her at the airport. In Miami, she discovered that she had won a prize in a drawing, a week for 2 in Miami. I was not particularly displeased, having spent a week of the cold Colorado winter in sunny Florida. Each time she leaves, I watch war films. On that Saturday, I watched The Dirty Dozen, Enemy at the Gates, and Saving Private Ryan. I purchased sandwich meat, buns, and a 23-gallon bucket of cheese balls. I proceeded to make a sandwich. I began watching Band of Brothers. It was while the soldiers from Easy Company were consuming their spaghetti lunch, having run up the stairs, that the telephone rang. One part of my mind expressed annoyance at this interruption to my viewing, while the other hoped that the caller was Giotto, informing me that she had won a trip to a warm destination. At that point, I would have been content with a week in Houston, where the temperature was 12 degrees below zero at night and 30 below zero during the day. The caller ID indicated that the call was from an unidentified number. I immediately recognized the voice as that of my old friend Paul. I was aware that he was aware of my absence from home due to my participation in military operations that weekend. I was taken aback when I heard a female voice on the other end of the line. I inquired as to the purpose of the call. The caller stated that she was attempting to contact Roger Rigby. I was surprised that she knew my name, as it is not common for people to refer to me as Zeke. I informed her that Roger was currently at the location. I then asked her the purpose of her call. "This is Detective Desiree Phillips of the Vale Police Department. I am contacting you because your wife was involved in an accident and is currently at Eagle Valley Medical Center. Her condition is critical and you should come to the hospital as soon as possible. I believe you are mistaken. My understanding is that your wife is in Houston for a 2-week convention with her company. Could you please confirm when you last spoke with her? She contacted me after her meetings last night. As I was preparing to go to dinner with my colleagues, the woman on the phone read me the address on Joy's driver's license. This was our address, but how could Joy's driver's license be in Vale if Joy had spoken to me from Houston? It is likely that the individual who was in your hospital most recently stole my wife's purse at the airport. Would you like me to press charges? Yes, you can do that. In the meantime, I need you to come here to check your wife. So requested that he bring the items and sign a statement, but urged him to hurry and come to the hospital if this was indeed his wife. I informed him that she would need to sign a consent form for her to be admitted. I stated that I would be there within a couple of hours. Despite my initial reluctance to embark on a futile search, I was determined to hold this woman accountable for using Joy's credit cards. I hastily gathered a few essential items and set out on the snowy highway, embarking on a nearly 2-hour journey. The drive to Vale took approximately 2 hours. I contemplated various possibilities. One was that someone had stolen or found Joy's wallet and decided to go skiing. It seemed unlikely that anyone would choose to ski with a stolen wallet in their possession. However, I considered the possibility that criminals might not be the most intelligent individuals. Therefore, it was possible that they would take a stolen wallet with them on their skis. I wondered whether thieves actually skied. This brings us to the second possibility, which is that Joy is in Vale. However, there is no apparent reason for her to be skiing in Vale when she should be at her convention in Houston. It is possible that she won the trip and decided to ride a few times before contacting me. On one occasion, she beat me to it when I was in Miami. There is also the possibility that she does not want me to know she is in Vale. Why does she need this information? Moreover, she is not in Vail, she is in Houston. How would you know? I spoke to on the evening in question, have you received any evidence that she is in Houston? It is implausible that she would use the informal y'all or engage in discussions about oil. These assumptions are unsubstantiated and unsupported. Did she call you from her cell phone or from the hotel where she was staying? She typically uses her mobile phone. Why would she incur the cost of a phone call when she could simply send a text message? I drove her to the airport myself. Did you see her retrieve her boarding pass? I did not. I dropped her off and went to work. Did you see her board the plane? I did not. The aircraft? How might one ascertain her location? Might she have traveled to another destination? It is implausible that she would have flown from Colorado Springs to Houston and then proceeded to Colorado. Colorado is not situated between Houston and Colorado Springs. It is more likely that she was flown from Houston to Denver and then taken to Colorado. It is possible that the individual in question is an imposter. Alternatively, it could be that the individual is a Scooby, a term used to describe someone who is unknowingly involved in a situation that is not as it seems. It is also possible that the individual was involved in an accident on Ville Mountain. Naivety and stupidity are attempts to justify one's own naivety, despite the voice in one's head. What evidence is there that she is cheating, besides the fact that she is in Vail when she should be in Houston? Is she suddenly starting to diet or exercise? No, she was always in good shape. Has she bought a bunch of sexy new clothes? No, he dresses the same as always. Have you changed your hair or makeup? No, she still looks the same. It appears that everyone else has been looking in the nines. It is evident that she has not been receiving any unusual phone calls, nor has she exhibited any unkind behavior or rejected sexual advances. She has not displayed any indications of mood swings or other behaviors that could be perceived as infidelity. The use of made-up words does not substantiate your argument. However, your assertion that she is not engaging in any unfaithful behavior is valid. I concede that we do not have sufficient information to make an accurate assessment. As I proceeded towards the exit leading to Virginia, I found myself contemplating the possibility that my suspicions might be true. What if it were Faith and she were indeed engaging in infidelity? In such a scenario, I would have no choice but to terminate the relationship. There is no room in my life for a partner who is unfaithful. Such a decision would undoubtedly be reckless, but it would also be justified. I had been married to Faith for a decade, but Elton Rigg never prayed to her. He was adept at identifying and dealing with those who were unfaithful to their partners. My mother, who was supposed to be a paragon of fidelity, was acting strangely for a while. I was only 10 years old at the time, but I sensed that something was amiss. She spent many evenings with her girlfriends, and her father always looked worried. One afternoon, when they thought I was visiting a friend, she confessed to him that she had slept with her boss. As a result, her father kicked her out. After leaving the family home, she took up residence with my grandmother for a period of time. The children saw her on weekends, but my father was adamant that they not adopt her way of life. A few months later, they resolved their differences and my mother returned, but her former lifestyle was no longer an option. My father was distressed by her frequent absences from work and eventually compelled her to resign from her position and seek alternative employment. If she went out for a night on the town with her friends, she was required to check in with her father, otherwise, he would call the bar they were in and inquire as to her whereabouts. I vowed to myself that I would never endure such a lifestyle. My parents remained together until I graduated from high school, at which point they divorced. Neither of them could tolerate such a situation. My father was a meticulous investigator until he discovered my mother's infidelity. I wonder, then, what kind of police officer I am. If she engaged in such behavior in my presence, he inquired one evening, in a state of inebriation, as to whether I had noticed anything untoward. This incident had an adverse effect on his professional performance, resulting in his early retirement due to a nervous breakdown. I have become increasingly detached from my mother in recent times, and I believe that her actions were a significant contributing factor to my father's demise. She was emotionally abusive, and it took a toll on him over time until he ultimately succumbed to her actions. I am determined not to end up in a similar situation. My father's enabling of a traitor to suck the life out of me is not a fate I wish upon my own children. 5 years ago, my brother Daniel walked into a room where his wife and her lover were having sex. He killed them while they were having sex several times a year. I visit him in Cannon City. If he behaves well, he might be released in another 10 years. Therefore, while I do not want my children to be like their father, I also do not want them to end up in a similar situation. It is possible that there is a middle ground, but I have not found it. If my partner is unfaithful, I want to engage in sexual intercourse with her as much as possible while simultaneously remaining faithful to my partner. Is anyone referring to these boundaries as barricades? I am unaware of when this term was first used. Since when did you become the arbiter of euphemisms? Will you follow the example of the men in online stories about cheating wives who leave their unfaithful wives and pursue other relationships? And then, he would simply depart, a millionaire with a curvaceous child who had long desired your company. I am certain that there are numerous such individuals. However, should circumstances take an unfavorable turn, I will simply continue to engage in sexual activity with my friends and romantic partners. As I drew nearer to the exit, I became increasingly nervous, and even my inner voice of reason seemed to recede. I was on the verge of I was compelled to vomit before disembarking from I-70. Locating a hospital was a relatively straightforward endeavor. I had previously visited Vale on several occasions and was therefore familiar with the layout. I parked my vehicle and proceeded through the snow and frosty air to the main entrance of the hospital. I had not consumed any beverage stronger than beer since my marriage. I had recently gotten married, but I suddenly found myself desirous of a bottle of Jack Daniels. I proceeded to the information desk, identified myself, and provided the attendant with the reason for my visit. He then informed me of the room number, which I proceeded to locate via the elevator. Upon reaching the floor in question, however, I discovered that the room in question was in fact the locked intensive care unit. I proceeded to the nurse's station and informed her of my purpose. She then contacted the appropriate individual and instructed me to wait at the door. Upon gaining access to the secure area, I was greeted by a short blonde nurse. Her ample bosom was visible beneath the array of buttons that did a commendable job of keeping her paisley top closed. She is under the influence of sedatives, the nurse stated. Unless it is my wife, I thought you must prepare. The patient had suffered horrific injuries and may not appear to be herself. She won't be able to hear you, but I want to make sure you can handle what you see. I won't be surprised if I can't recognize her, I said, though my voice still cracked. I was unprepared for the scene that greeted me upon entering the room. The patient was a woman of considerable height and stature, which led me to believe she might be my wife. However, upon closer examination of her face, I was unable to confirm this. It appeared that she had sustained significant injuries, and it was evident that she had been through a traumatic experience. The nurse, who was present during my examination, informed me that the patient had not been involved in any skiing accidents. This morning, I was informed that a woman had been assaulted and left in an ambulance. The woman had been beaten. I was incredulous. I had always assumed that faithful wives were not beaten or abandoned in an ambulance. I was forced to concede that this was a possibility, but I was still unsure of how to react. I was uncertain whether this was my wife. I told her that perhaps this would be help, she said, lifting the blanket to expose the woman's left thigh. This was the only evidence required to confirm her identity. I had never observed many women displaying the image of Jiminy Cricket on their inner thighs. I was uncertain as to why she had done so, but she had done so shortly before our wedding. It was a last-minute decision. Prior to her bachelorette party, she never elucidated the significance of the tattoo, other than stating that she had always admired Jiminy and that he appeared to symbolize her parents, Jim and Yvonne. I was not entirely convinced by this explanation, but it was the only one she offered. It was challenging for me to look at her when I witnessed her experiencing distress on that occasion. Additionally, it was the inaugural occasion on which I had the opportunity to make her acquaintance. My companions and I had procured a quantity of beer for consumption at an after-show gathering following the conclusion of a musical performance by the ensemble known as Tool. Following the concert, we were engaged in convivial pursuits when an unidentified female approached and informed us that her romantic partner was desirous of procuring a beer. My associate, identified as Chad, advised her that she was welcome to remain and partake in a few beverages. Despite our initial interest in providing for her boyfriend, we ultimately declined. The girl then proceeded to plead with us once more, but Chad ultimately dismissed her. I then heard a scream emanating from the direction where the girl had gone. I observed several individuals pointing at something and then proceeding to investigate. I then witnessed a male individual physically assaulting a female individual. I have never held a positive opinion of this individual. I was compelled to intervene in the situation as I perceived that the male perpetrator was assaulting the female victim. I promptly arrived at the scene and identified the victim as the same individual who had requested beer. The perpetrator was approximately 1.5 meters tall and weighed 45 kilograms. He exhibited symptoms of small man syndrome, including verbalizations such as "Where's my damn beer? You damn .. which indicated a lack of empathy and remorse. He shouted, striking her. She raised her hands above her head, attempting to fend him off. "Damn you," I said, reaching him at that moment. "Why isn't anyone helping this girl?" I asked myself. I grabbed him by the collar and pulled him away from her. "Leave her alone," I said. "You're a .. and we didn't give her beer for you." I advised the individual to refrain from interfering in my affairs, as he would likely suffer the consequences. The man appeared enraged and began striking the girl on the head. I intervened physically, assisting the girl and moving toward the van where Chad was already present. "He will be displeased with your decision to prepare an ice pack." I observed a homeless individual with unkempt hair and a disagreeable appearance. "What will this peculiar individual do?" "I will inform you of his actions. He will retreat to the place from which you emerged and hope never to encounter me again." I escorted her back to the van. We provided her with ice. I observed the security personnel approach the fallen loser. His companions stood silently with their hands in their pockets as the police officers arrested the intoxicated individual and transported him to the squad car along with the other 3 individuals who had been detained for the same offense. I attempted to approach the officers to please inform them of the incident involving the female student and the individual in question. "It is imperative that you refrain from further involvement in this matter. You have already made significant contributions to this situation. It is unlikely that the individual in question will alter his behavior, particularly given his history of disregard for authority. It is probable that he will return to Wyoming." The female student's appearance was notable, even with the use of contact lenses. She was attractive. I found myself questioning the question arises as to why the most beautiful girls always end up with complete fools. We took her home after having a beer, and she informed us that she had some bruises, but she seemed okay. After we dropped her off, Chad said to me, "Dude, I think she wants you." "Damn it, dude, why the hell would she want me?" "She's just grateful that I stopped that." "I am uncertain as to why she requires your assistance, but she provided me with this item for you." He then handed me a piece from one of the beer boxes. Due to the lack of sufficient illumination, I was unable to decipher the message, so I placed it in my back pocket to read it when the light permitted. I was reluctant to allow Chad to stop under a street light or similar source of illumination, as I would never do so myself. Upon reaching my apartment that evening, I observed a piece of cardboard bearing a phone number and the words, "Call me, Joy." My immediate response was to agree to do so. I then proceeded to retire for the evening. 2 days later, I contacted her. I was uncertain whether she would recall me, but when I revealed my identity, she did. "Was she?" I replied. "I was already beginning to suspect that you would never contact me." We conversed for approximately an hour before she had to depart for another engagement. I derived considerable pleasure from our discourse, and I was gratified when she called me in the evening and we conversed until midnight. We embarked upon our inaugural excursion together on Friday night. I accompanied her to a modest Italian restaurant in the foothills and subsequently to a bar where live music was performed. They consumed beverages and danced until the bar closed. I then escorted her to a residence. "Are you attempting to engage in sexual intercourse with me?" she inquired. "There will be sufficient opportunity for that at a later juncture. I am not inclined to engage in sexual intercourse on the first date." I proceeded to take her to a modest Italian restaurant in the foothills, followed by a bar where live music was performed. They consumed alcohol and engaged in dancing. When the bar closed, I escorted her to her residence. She inquired as to my intentions, to which I replied that there would be sufficient time for that later. I do not favor sexual intercourse on the first date, as I believe it is. I decided to wait a few dates before pursuing further intimacy. A total of 3 weeks passed before I saw her again. I was reluctant to admit it, but I had a pattern of experiencing difficulties in relationships after sleeping with a girl after the first date. I was becoming increasingly paranoid. We spoke on the phone. We had the opportunity to see each other frequently, but coordinating schedules proved challenging. When I was free, she was often occupied with work. Additionally, her aunt passed away, and she had to attend the funeral in Florida with her family. Finally, the weekend after my aunt's funeral, we were able to go to the movies. I picked her up, along with her father. He greeted me at the door, and I was uncertain as to what to expect. He inquired about my profession and expressed curiosity about my residency in the area. He then proceeded to launch a verbal assault. He asserted that I was a superior match for Joy than the individual in question, whom he deemed to be inferior. He stated that he would never come to the house to meet me. He clenched his hands into fists and said, "I met her." I replied with a grin, "I hope he's smart enough to stay away, but I doubt his intelligence." He was interrupted when Joy entered the room. When she saw me, she smiled widely and hugged me. She was wearing the dress she wore was particularly revealing, accentuating her physique in a way that made her appear to be a veritable walking wet dream. I found myself reconsidering my previously held belief that it was preferable to refrain from sexual intercourse until at least the third date. Ultimately, however, we did not engage in sexual intercourse until our next date, which was the evening I met her father. She informed me that she needed to be at work early the following morning. She implored me to decline all subsequent arrangements, stipulating that I was in her debt. The following Friday, we went for dinner. I did not discern any of the signals I had previously identified. She did not appear interested during our time together that evening. While driving her home, she suddenly began to experience. She informed me that she was experiencing gastric distress and expressed a pressing need to use the restroom. Given that my apartment was only a short distance away, I hastened to assist her. She expressed her gratitude as she hastened to the restroom. Despite my initial intention to engage in sexual intercourse, she indicated that she was not yet ready. I proceeded to wait for her on a stool while she completed her urgent business. A few minutes later, I heard the toilet flush. I then heard her say, "Thank you," as she entered the living room. I turned around and the words "no problem" were on the verge of coherence when my breath caught in my throat. Joy then walked into my bathroom wearing nice jeans. Joy was clad in a black turtleneck and a leather jacket. She was now standing in front of me in a state of undress, wearing only skimpy red panties and high-heeled boots. I must have been staring because she laughed and said, "Take off your coat and stay like that for a while." I removed more than just my coat. The following morning, we went to have breakfast. After breakfast, we did not venture out of the house until Sunday afternoon. I accompanied her to a residence before she exited the vehicle. She informed me that her superior would be severely reprimanded if he ever requested her to work on the weekends again. It is unfeasible to dissuade a woman from her preferred illicit substance. She inquired, "If I'm still her drug of choice, then why is she now in a drug-induced coma?" I accompanied the nurse back from the room to the infirmary, signed a multitude of documents, and was then entrusted with her personal belongings. The hospital staff were reluctant to assume responsibility for them, as the police had already conducted a thorough examination. The nurse informed me that the bag contained a comprehensive inventory of all items was then provided. The intercom buzzed, prompting her to pick up the phone and speak with an unidentified individual. It became evident that the situation was indeed peculiar. I was compelled to acknowledge that missteps had been made. For instance, Joy had requested my presence in Denver to embark on a joint venture with Vale. However, she was then obliged to divulge information regarding her romantic involvement with a certain gigolo. This revelation, in turn, would likely evoke a strong emotional response, potentially leading to legal ramifications and even military involvement. And nuclear warheads, dirty cheating women of easy virtue. Damn it, I'd love to beat the crap out of her. Do you have proof that she was with someone else? No. Do you have proof that she has at least dated someone else since you got married? No. So, until we know more, why be angry? Aren't you the individual who is still pushing the theory of treason? The inner voice of your. The mind reserves the right to change its position. I arrived at the police station just as the sun was setting. At the front desk, I informed the attendant of my identity. He promptly contacted the appropriate personnel. A woman with brown hair and a tall man who resembled Harry Rome emerged to greet me. The woman, Detective Phillips, and the man, Deputy Devon, were both cordial. The officers were cordial and professional. Devon seemed to be waiting for someone to commit a crime. He regarded me with a gaze that suggested he viewed me as a potential criminal. Should I request legal counsel? Do you have any reason to believe that you need a lawyer? No, I have nothing to hide. Detective Phillips led me into a room and motioned for me to sit down. Devon proceeded in the other direction. I will follow. Please record our conversation. Mr. Rigg, is that acceptable? I have no objections. My apologies for the unfortunate incident with the individual in question. I ask your forgiveness for what she said when I called you a bastard. I was unaware that you were my friend and that you were disturbing me during my personal time. Could you please elaborate on what your personal time consists of? She inquired, raising an eyebrow. Could you also describe what it consists of in films about the Second World War? Joy asked. She dislikes them so much that when she leaves town, I engage in the viewing of war movies until her return. At that moment, Deputy Devon entered and took a seat. Are we ready? He inquired. Yes, Detective Phillips replied, pressing the switch on the wall, which, as I had assumed, activated all the voice recorders in the room. The purpose of this interview is to question Mr. Roger Rigby in connection with case number 1256G, in which the victim is Joy Tanya Rigby. In case 1256G, the victim is identified as Joy Tanya Rigby. Mr. Rigby, please state your name, age, and date of birth. My name is Roger Ezekiel Rigby. I am 35 years old and was born on December 16th. Please provide your address and occupation. I reside at 1467 West Darnu Avenue in Colorado Springs. I am employed as a bricklayer. Can you provide the times you were present between 6 from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. the previous day? I was in Manitou Springs, where I repaired a fireplace from 7 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. From Manitou Springs, I proceeded on the road from Manitou to Jerry's Bar on the northwest side of town, near my residence. I arrived at Jerry's around 11 a.m. and returned to my residence at 11 p.m. 30 and remained there until you called. Can anyone corroborate that you were in these locations at that time? Mrs. Blanche Donovan can confirm my presence at her residence in Manitou. Paul Hannibal can confirm that I was at Jerry's, and my neighbor Stephen Harper can confirm that I was home at midnight and again at 3 a.m. and again at 6 a.m. The morning of the incident in question, Stephen was able to confirm that you were at home at specific moments. Devon inquired in a calm and collected manner, as both of them have dogs that require bathroom breaks at the same time. Stephen is a night owl, and when he sees Devon walking the dog, he always has to come out to say hello and let the dog relieve itself. They discussed the matter for a moment, and then Phillips continued her line of questioning. When did you last see your wife? On Monday morning, I drove my wife to the airport so that she could fly to Houston. She was attending the annual general meeting of her company, which is open only to the top performers in each region. This is the third consecutive year that she has attended. What is your wife's occupation? She is a life insurance salesperson for TransUnited. You may be familiar with the television commercials featuring an elderly Asian man attempting to explain a financial product to a younger individual. The advertisement in question is aimed at children, yet the advice provided is of questionable value. The premise is that a child who is unable to draw well should prepare for the inevitable, presumably so that his or her loved ones will not be burdened. This advice seems misguided, to say the least. It is akin to telling a child to watch cartoons while the parent jumps in front of a bus. The advertisement in question is representative of a broader issue in advertising. It is not difficult to understand why the viewer might wince at the sight of it. The central issue is as follows: I observed her transporting her suitcase to the port, after which I proceeded to my place of work. I had an appointment that I was obliged to attend. You did not accompany her to the reception. I had intended to drive us to the airport an hour before she checked in and proceeded through security. I was hoping we could have breakfast together before she left, so why did I not? We had intended to have breakfast together, but we were only 2 miles from the airport when she suddenly remembered that she had not taken her bag from the bed. Consequently, we had to return home to pick it up. It was surprising that she forgot something as important as her luggage. She also stated that she thought I had taken her into the car when I went to warm it up. This led to further confusion when she asked why I had not taken my bag with me. I informed her that I was going to start the car, but my bag was still lying open on the bed. I did not notice that she did not have one. When she finally got to the car, she informed me that she had not brought her bag with her. How often does your wife go on business trips? She goes on 2 business trips a year, 2 weeks in February for the general meeting and 2 weeks in August for meetings and training seminars. The meeting is held in Houston every year. No, he is relocating. Last year, she was in Los Angeles and New York. This year, she was in Houston. They engaged in further banter, and then Denton inquired of Mr. Rigby, "Do you know anyone who would wish to cause harm to your wife?" "No one I know, with the exception of perhaps a few of her clients," Mr. Rigby replied. "Why would they want to harm your wife, Mr. Rigby?" he inquired. "Well, the manner in which the company employs its sales personnel to gain access to one's residence for the purpose of selling unsavory products is in itself a rather deceptive practice. The individuals with whom she interacts are primarily those who have subscribed to the complimentary children's informational package. My wife contacts them to inform them that she has already provided them with their set and that she is now seeking an in-person meeting to deliver the remaining items. After handing them the kit, she began offering them life insurance. It is unclear whether she met with clients in Ville. She should be in Houston with others doing the same." Devon then inquired as to the reason for her absence. Phillips responded with a sigh and a look of comprehension. "Mr. Rigby, you are free to leave. Are you intending to return home tonight?" "No, I will find a motel." As they were departing, they offered the customary parting words, "We will contact you." As I was driving back to the hospital, I suddenly realized that I had far more questions than answers. It may be a mere speculation, but it appears somewhat suspicious that, a mere week ago, I had dropped her off at the airport so that she could fly to Houston, Texas. Less than a week later, she found herself in a hospital bed in Vail. Upon my return to the hospital, I was informed that visiting hours were closed for the day. However, I was told that I could return at 7:00 in the morning. I inquired of the guard whether he was aware of any inexpensive yet respectable hotels in the vicinity. He informed me that there were no such establishments, but that during the ski season, inexpensive was a relative term in Vail, signifying that one was staying with relatives. I acknowledged his remark with a polite laugh and proceeded back into the cold. I recalled that I had retained Joy's belongings. I retrieved the inventory sheet and perused it, yet I was unable to discern the item in question. I then examined the items that the police had requested not to be returned. The only item on the list was a prescription bottle containing 5 Percocet pills. It was evident that Joy had undergone root canal treatment on her tooth 3 weeks prior. In the weeks prior, she had not required the full quantity of pain medication. I was perplexed by her decision to carry them with her, particularly given the inclusion of her boots in the returned inventory. Upon closer examination of the bag, I discovered Joy's boots, which she had taken with her on all her journeys. These boots featured an almost invisible flap that could be used to conceal credit cards or other sensitive items. She reasoned that if she hid the room key in this flap, we would still have access to the room if we were robbed while walking. I located the valve and discovered that it contained a key card. However, the card was empty, lacking any color scheme or logos. Identifying the logos on the item in question, it was completely white, so if it were to be dropped while riding, it would be the end of it. Consequently, I now have the key to her room, but I am unsure of its location. Additionally, I am uncertain of her cell phone's whereabouts. I initially searched the list and did not find it. I then searched her purse, but it was not there. It would be prudent to ascertain whether she had concealed it. It is, in fact, a positive indication that it is not present. A few months ago, my neighbor Stephen experienced a challenge. His life partner, Joe, was compelled to procure a new mobile phone on a frequent basis as he would misplace it and become unaware of its whereabouts. Typically, it was located on a shelf in a store or on a table in a restaurant. He was a software developer for a company that specialized in mobile phone applications. He created an application that could use the phone's GPS to track his location. Joy had also lost a few phones, so he provided me with a copy of the app for her phone. It was highly effective. I could open the app, enter her phone number, and it would provide the distance and direction. As the distance between the two subjects decreased, the subject in question became more specific in his responses. However, there was a limitation in the ability to discern altitude differences. This information was discovered when the subject misplaced her phone in a store. Upon launching the application, it directed her to the store, but when she returned home, it led her to the sofa. She searched extensively for the phone but was unable to locate it. I then discovered the phone under the sofa and even under the pillows. It then occurred to me that our bedroom was located above the living room upstairs. The device indicated that our bedroom was the destination, and I found the phone between Joy's nightstand and the bed. It is beneficial that the application runs from the phone's memory, as this allows the phone to be found even if it is turned off or the battery is dead. The phone could still be located. I opened the application on my phone and was immediately informed that I was 4 miles northeast of Joy's phone. I started the vehicle and proceeded along the winding route towards the mountain. Upon reaching the base of the ski resort, the individual in question directed me towards a road leading to several luxurious ski lodges. I am unsure of his identity, but he exudes a certain degree of sophistication. I proceeded to the cabin driveway, where the indicator finally informed me that I was approximately half a mile from the phone. The house was 4 stories high and contained numerous Lexus and Audis in the parking lot. I was gratified to have driven Joy's BMW rather than my previous work vehicle, a less luxurious SUV. I observed that the house had there are 2 entrances, one leads past the reception desk into the restaurant and lounge area, and the other leads directly into the lobby. I elected to use the second entrance. I reasoned that I would have to explain less if I did not go past the receptionist. I proceeded down the hallway and entered room 114, as indicated by the indicator on my phone. I attempted to utilize the keycard, but it proved ineffective. I promptly returned to the corridor and ascended the stairs to the 2nd floor. I proceeded until the indicator indicated that Joy's phone was in room 214. Once more, the keycard was unsuccessful, prompting me to head towards the stairs to the 3rd floor. I paused near room 314, feeling adrift and lacking a clear plan of action. I was uncertain as to whether I should enter the room and assault the occupant or contact Detective Phillips and request her presence. I was unsure as to whether there was anyone in the room, let alone the individual who had assaulted Joy. I placed my ear against the door, but could not discern the television or voices. I therefore inserted the key card, and the lock opened. I pressed the handle, and the door began to move. Upon opening the door fully and stepping back, I anticipated an imminent attack. The room was in darkness, and I could discern only a limited amount of light through the open doorway. I proceeded with caution until I located the switches. I pressed my back against the wall and activated the switch, which illuminated the hallway and the solitary lamp. At the far end of the room, I sensed a need to assume a protective posture. I pressed my back against the wall and closed the door. I then turned the latch on the door and pressed my back against it. I was unable to see anything in the bathroom or in the entire room. I decided to clear the main part of the room first. What if someone slipped out of the necessity of inspecting the bathroom first became apparent? The possibility of someone hiding behind the wall and surreptitiously approaching from behind was a distinct one. The inner voice, which had been urging an inspection of the bathroom, was finally ignored. The bathroom light was turned on. No one emerged armed with an axe. No one snuck out. I proceeded to the main room, where I observed that approximately 3/4 of the room was visible from the entrance. Upon closer examination, I noted that the room was devoid of any occupants. Of note, Joy's suitcase was positioned on her neatly made bed, her cell phone was charging on her nightstand, and her laptop was situated on a small table by the window. The room appeared to be excessively tidy, as though it had not been occupied for an extended period. However, it also seemed to lack the thoroughness of a professional cleaning. I proceeded to examine the bathroom more closely and noticed several wet spots on the sink, indicating that someone had attempted to clean it, though without the use of conventional cleaning products. The soap was located in a soap dish in the shower, rather than in a wrapper. The towels at the bottom of the small pile of towels were not as neat as those at the top and were damp. It appeared that someone had attempted to make the room look as though it had never been used. The bed was made, but the quilt hung unevenly. In light of these observations, it might be advisable to contact the police. For what it doesn't appear that she was beaten here, I pulled back the blanket and observed that someone was sleeping on the sheets, but there were no indications of violence. None of the walls appeared damaged. I took Joy's phone and sat down at the table with it while I waited for her laptop to boot up. I examined her phone, which was straightforward to do because Joy never protected anything. I considered the possibility that no one was aware of my whereabouts. Initially, I contacted my sister, Beth, and requested her assistance in caring for my dog. I did not provide her with a detailed explanation of my circumstances in Vale, merely stating that I had business to attend to and would return home within a day or two. My subsequent communication with my father proved more challenging. I informed Jim of the situation and provided him with the details I had ascertained thus far. He expressed hope that this was merely a recurrence of Joy's previous victory in the contest. I committed to contacting him the following day after consulting with the attending physicians. My final communication was with Hugh, my cousin, and a detective with the El Pozo County Sheriff's Department. Hugh and I reside in close proximity, and we frequently interact. I requested that he relay to the Vale Police my discovery of Joy's place of accommodation. I also inquired as to whether he could facilitate communication with the individual in question, whom we shall refer to as the Vale Police, assured us that he would keep us apprised of developments. He subsequently indicated his intention to take action, whereupon we promptly departed. I then conceived of a plan whereby I contacted the lodge reception via my cellular device and inquired about Joy Rigby. The response I received was, "I'm afraid we have no registered guests with that last name, sir." I then proposed that perhaps she had registered under her maiden name. "That's a possibility," the employee replied. "However, there are no records indicating that anyone has registered with that surname." I thanked the employee and terminated the call. By that time, Joy's laptop had fully booted up. I accessed its contents and observed that the entire history had been erased. However, the entire history was erased. I was certain that Joy was not responsible for this, as she never deletes anything. I accessed both of her email accounts and discovered that they had also been cleared. The passwords for both were simple: my date of birth. I knew that I could take the laptop to Stephen, as he and Joe are highly skilled programmers who are able to extract missing information from computers. I reviewed her mobile phone and found the same result: all of her SMS messages had been deleted. The subject has become more adept at deleting text messages, as her phone has become too slow if she does not do so. However, she has never deleted the entire folder. I will inquire with Stephen as to whether he can assist with this issue as well. I stood up and walked over to her suitcase. He opened it and removed all the contents, but I only found one business suit, which she was wearing when I dropped her off at the airport. There were 3 cocktail dresses and the rest was lingerie. It was evident that I was headed to court. The following morning, I took a brief shower, retrieved Joy's mobile phone and laptop, and departed the room. I left her suitcase in the same state I had found it. I spent the night in a chair adjacent to the table, as I was unable to sleep on the bed. I consumed a cup of coffee in a nearby cafe and then contacted Detective Phillips. When she answered, I informed her, "It's time to get up." I was pleased that my irreverent sense of humor was still intact, as I was experiencing a considerable degree of distress. I was taken aback by the situation. She did not appear to be sleepy when I called her. "Detective Phillips, this is Roger Rigby. Last night, I was going through an inventory of my wife's belongings and found a hotel key card in some of her things. I thought I should pass it on to you in case it helps you in her case." She thanked me and said that she would meet me in half an hour. I drove aimlessly around Ville for 25 minutes and then headed to the police station. Detective Phillips greeted me as soon as I entered. The lobby. "Good morning, Mr. Rigby," she said, shaking my hand. I replied by handing her the key card. "Here she is," she said, leading me down the corridor to the office. I looked like a man whose world had collapsed. I didn't want to unwind. I didn't know why, but I told her that I found the number using Joy's phone. She frowned a couple of times, but seemed to feel better when I said I didn't touch the bed. I gave her Joy's phone but didn't mention the laptop. "Mr. Rigby, I am unsure of your current plan of action. I believe there is a possibility that I may lose my wife as a result of this situation. I would appreciate the opportunity to hear her explanation, although I am skeptical about its veracity. It is important not to lose hope, Mr. Rigby. There may be a logical explanation for this that does not involve extramarital affairs." She stated this with confidence, but I could discern from her demeanor that she did not see any other options. I thanked her and proceeded to the hospital. I was sent to the NICU waiting room until the next 15-minute visitation session began. The minute-long visiting session commenced, during which patients are permitted to visit for 15 minutes every 2 hours. After the second 15 minutes had elapsed, I was eager to inquire about the circumstances surrounding the patient's condition. The attending physician emerged from the room and introduced himself as a man of approximately my age, with sandy brown hair and a demeanor suggesting he would be an excellent all-star athlete. Star quarterback Dr. Benson informed me that Joy was recuperating from her injuries. However, he inquired if I would prefer that she be transported to Denver. St. Luke's has an exemplary rehabilitation program for traumatic brain injuries, and I believe that her chances of recovery will be significantly enhanced there. He elucidated the medical terminology associated with her injuries, yet I could only comprehend that she had sustained a blow to the head, either from an external force or from falling onto something, which could potentially result in neurological impairment. I then authorized the transfer of her care. She was scheduled to be transported the following day, and I requested that St. Luke's contact me in advance so that I could complete the necessary paperwork on my way home. It was determined that she had been struck on the head either by another individual or by a falling object, which could have resulted in traumatic brain injury. I then provided authorization for her transport. She was scheduled for transport the following day, and I inquired if the staff could notify me ahead of time so that I could complete the necessary paperwork at St. Luke's on my return journey. "Where is your residence?" the staff member inquired. "Colorado Springs," I replied. He then displayed a concerned demeanor and requested that I wait for a moment. He proceeded to make a phone call at the table. After a few minutes, he returned and informed me that our initial plan had been altered. He proposed that we transport her to St. Augustine Hospital in Colorado Springs, citing the hospital's comparable program to that of St. Luke's and the potential for easier family visits. He then departed, and the nurse I was presented with a new batch of documents to sign. I signed them and then made my third and final visit before heading home. I stood and looked at her. My vision blurred as I thought about my future without her. "Joy, I am unsure of the circumstances that have led to your presence here. I am uncertain of the specifics of the situation, but I am aware that you appear to be keeping secrets that I believe our marriage is not equipped to handle. I will not file for I will not pursue a divorce until I have had an opportunity to discuss the situation with you. However, I am confident that our marriage is over." I left the hospital with tears in my eyes, at least without arousing suspicion. If I were in a bar or an auto parts store, more people might look at me in surprise. On my way out of the hospital, I called Jim and informed him that I was transported to Colorado Springs and I would arrive later to provide an update to Jim and Yvonne. Upon returning home, I was relieved to see that my sister's Jeep was still parked in my driveway, as I could always discuss anything with her. I was greeted at the door by an enthusiastic Doberman, whom I named Piper. When I entered the living room, I was greeted by an enthusiastic Doberman. Upon my return, I was greeted by Beth. Her presence provided me with immense relief, as she was aware of the situation that had transpired. I embraced her and expressed my love for her. Then, I proceeded to divulge the details of the matter. She provided me with emotional support and comforted me during my emotional outburst and subsequent mourning of the dissolution of my marriage. She remained with me until late in the evening. She attempted to persuade me to have dinner, but I was uninterested in eating. I was aware that I was compelled to inform Jim of the entirety of the situation. I permitted her to accompany me during this phase. By the time I had conveyed the entirety of the information I had discovered to Jim, I could discern that he was no longer certain that his daughter was not treating me unfairly. I had previously observed him exhibit a similar demeanor on one occasion. Joy and I had been dating for several months, and they infrequently spent weekends together and spent free evenings together. On weekdays when her schedule allowed, Joy and I would spend time together. On Thursday evening, Joy informed me that she would have to cancel our weekend plans. I was disappointed, but I recognized that such occurrences were not uncommon. As she was about to call, I heard Jim's voice, expressing anger and demanding that he meet me. I heard Joy make a disapproving sound and tell me to ignore it. I was compelled to ignore the subsequent verbal altercation, which was initiated by Jim in a highly agitated state. 10 minutes later, I found myself standing on the porch of her residence, where Jim was engaged in a heated exchange. He proceeded to launch a series of vitriolic accusations, including, "You're no better than that little bastard. If you think you need to whip my daughter, be a man and whip me, and should I whip your daughter?" I was taken aback by the sheer audacity of his statements. It is astonishing that he would even suggest such a thing. She did not go out last night and was not inclined to divulge that he is the king of __. What motivates him to lash out now? I am somewhat displeased. First, I must clarify that the only girl I spanked was that vile ___ Garrett on the night of the concert when I met Joy. Second, I have not seen or been around Joy since last weekend. It is uncommon for them to interact during the week. Thirdly, it is imperative that you are aware of certain facts before you commence yelling. Joy and Avon emerged to ascertain the situation. I observed that Joy had a black eye. What transpired to cause this injury? You struck her, Jim. I was on the verge of responding in an unkind manner when Joy interjected, stating that he had not hit her. I must apologize, Father, but I engaged in a heated discussion with Garrett last night. I exited the residence and proceeded to my vehicle. Joy loudly implored me to return, and Jim swiftly intercepted me and forcibly turned me around. I am profoundly sorry for my actions. I recognize that my behavior was unacceptable and that I should not have engaged in such a confrontation. I am deeply sorry for the distress I have caused you. I understand your anger, and I am sorry for speaking to you in a way that was less than respectful. I express my apologies to Joy for causing her further distress. However, I must inform you that we are terminating our relationship. I was unable to discern the exact nature of the remarks made by the other party as I hastily closed the car door and departed. I proceeded to drive aimlessly until I reached the vicinity of Garrett's residence. I parked the vehicle at a distance of approximately 5 spaces and proceeded on foot to his front door. I knocked on the door and, after a brief interval, heard footsteps approaching. I was aware that you would make an appearance, as he had previously indicated. His demeanor shifted from one of expectation to one of surprise when I struck him. It appeared that he was not prepared for my arrival. He fell backwards into the front room, and I proceeded to assault him as he did so. I am unsure of the precise number of strikes I delivered, however, after a few instances, he ceased to react. Consequently, I delivered a couple more kicks and gained upon my readiness to depart. I observed that his trailer was filled with boxes indicative of a forthcoming relocation. I inquired as to whether he was undertaking a similar transition. He responded with a subdued exhalation, and I extended my best wishes for a felicitous sojourn. I then proceeded to my residence, where I applied ice to my inflamed knuckles. Upon entering the house, I was greeted by an incoming call. I answered the phone without first ascertaining the identity of the caller, and before I could offer a greeting, the ex-girlfriend was screaming. My girlfriend initiated contact with me. I was unable to terminate the call before the intensity of the ringing increased. The caller ID indicated that it was Joy, so I permitted her to place a call. Approximately an hour later, the phone rang again. It ceased ringing after a brief interval. I was gratified that she had finally acquiesced. 10 minutes later, I received another call. I was displeased and prepared to respond in a discourteous manner. However, the caller ID indicated that it was my cousin Hugh, who was contacting me to inform me that the CSPD, Colorado Springs Police Department, had received a call. The caller expressed concern that one Garrett Jimenez might be in danger. I am indifferent about this individual. I informed you that I did not wish to be contacted, but CSPD is going to reach out to you. It appears that Mr. Jimenez was in a severely compromised state. He was only able to relay that a group of large individuals had assaulted him. I am unaware of any individuals who would fit that description. Hugh, the caller, was concerned that you might harm this individual, so when he was found on the floor, the first person they called was you. Thank you for the warning. I appreciate your input. I was able to provide an alibi, which I hope will exonerate me. By the time the police arrived at my residence, I was prepared. My hockey equipment was positioned near my front door, and I had sustained only minor injuries, including a scratch on my hand. The officer did not appear to be particularly interested in identifying the perpetrator, and my explanation about working on hockey equipment seemed to be accepted. Additionally, I was playing on a major league team sponsored by the police department on Saturday, which may have provided a plausible explanation for my injuries. I was eager to commence preparations for the forthcoming season. One of the most proficient defensemen on my team has yet to return, which will afford me greater ice time. Upon returning home in the evening, I discovered a multitude of notes on my door. With the exception of one, they were from Joy. The remaining note was from Jim. He expressed remorse for his misguided belief that I posed a threat to Joy. He also requested my understanding and forgiveness for his daughter's actions. I promptly contacted them via their home phone number. Fortunately, Jim answered. I informed him that I did not hold it against him for his reaction. His response was that of a reasonable father in such circumstances. It was not your fault that Joy did not confess immediately. I am gratified to hear this. I have been concerned about this situation all night. Would you like to speak to Joy? I could hear her anxious voice in the background, pleading with him to give her the phone. I am not inclined to speak to her. I had previously arranged to meet with her on the previous day, so that I would not have to see her face. I am sorry, Jim, that I do not have the time in my life for cheating women. As I informed Jim and Ion about everything I had learned in Vale, I realized that he too was remembering the old days. I am unsure of how to proceed, son. I am glad that I have brought this up with you in the hope that you will not act rashly. I can assure you that I am not yet considering hiring lawyers, but I am preparing for the possibility. She will have to provide a convincing explanation of this situation, whatever the outcome may be. I and Roger Ivan consider you to be our son, and we hope that, should the worst come to pass, you will not be excluded from our lives. Despite my trepidation that you will sever all ties with us, I reassured them that I would not do so. Beth and I then proceeded to my residence. We drove in silence for several minutes before Beth inquired, "Will everything be okay with you? Do I have a choice? Curling up and dying is not an option. I'm sorry this is happening to you. If she cheats, is there any chance you will remain together?" No. I cannot fathom becoming one of those paranoid husbands who must install GPS trackers in their wives. The presence of undergarments and surveillance devices in every area of the residence is intended to facilitate nocturnal repose. Your mother has inquired about you. She expresses affection for you and would appreciate the opportunity to converse with you. She would like to discuss the propriety of your infidelity and the implications of your assertion that it is acceptable to imply that I should engage in sexual intercourse with your wife. I am not inclined to engage in such discourse with her. Beth has consistently demonstrated a protective attitude towards our mother since Dan's incarceration. She encouraged me to visit our mother with greater frequency. I have done so. Once she began discussing the importance of communication, I excused myself from the conversation. Joy admonished me for my abrupt departure, but I informed her that I would not engage in such trivial discourse and reiterated my stance against infidelity. I simply wished to avoid any potential regret in the future. I implored her not to worry and reassured her that I would not make any hasty decisions. Upon my arrival at Stephen's residence, I found myself in a situation that required immediate attention. Joe's living room. Upon receiving the laptop from Stephen, I proceeded to provide him with an overview of the situation. After approximately 30 minutes, Stephen requested that I allow him to retain the laptop for a period of 1 or 2 days, citing the necessity for further investigation. I did not object to this request. Joe then proposed that, should I be interested, he could arrange for me to meet his cousin, Joe. When I inquired about the cousin's physical attributes, Joe responded that, in addition to possessing C-cup breasts and a shaved pubic area, the cousin in question was not particularly reserved. This response was met with laughter. Joe was consistently attempting to embarrass me, yet I had no issue with his and Stephen's preferences or way of life. Consequently, I was typically referred to as Jed if I was not shocked or Prud if I declined sexual intercourse. I remained for a while and consumed a beer with Joe. Stephen was absorbed in Joy's laptop and was unaware of my presence in the room after we had finished drinking. Joe informed me that it was time for him to retire for the night in order to be on time for work the following morning. He needed to rise at 3 o'clock. At approximately 12 a.m., I will likely retire for the evening and engage in introspective contemplation regarding my recently single, attractive neighbor. I had previously surmised that Mrs. Jasper had been widowed for an extended period. Joe expressed amusement and wished me a pleasant evening, while Stephen responded with a monosyllabic utterance as I departed. I returned to my residence and released Piper from her duties, engaging her in a game of tag for a brief period. During the summer months, I typically determine that we have played sufficient ball, allowing Piper to continue playing until my arm becomes fatigued. In the winter, I allow Piper to determine when we have played enough. Typically, this occurs after no more than 3 throws, at which point she is ready to return home. I then climb into bed and call Piper over to me. Joy is displeased when I permit Piper to sleep in the bed, but at this juncture, I am indifferent to her objections. Despite Piper's reputation for being a heavy sleeper, I cannot entirely attribute my restless nights to her presence. The following morning, I consume coffee and attempt to focus on the sports section of the newspaper until 8 a.m. I was seated in the office of Bernie Jag, who is the superior of Joy. I was aware that he would respond to my inquiries, so I inquired as to what I could do for Brian. Bernie responded cheerfully, "I am unsure why he consistently referred to me as Brian. I am Roger." Bernie simply wished to inquire if I could provide some insight on a matter. "Of course, Roger. How can I be of assistance? Is there any reason related to your insurance agency that would prompt my wife to depart from the convention in Houston and travel to Vail, Colorado, for a skiing excursion?" The town in question is Vail, located in the northern part of Colorado. It is the same Vail that was previously mentioned. The reason that was provided for Joy's absence from the meeting of your company is as follows. You may be aware that the meeting was for the 10 highest paid individuals in the state. However, it seems that there may have been a misunderstanding. The meeting was held in Houston last week, and it did not involve the highest paid workers in the state. Joy is a managing agent is a title used to describe a person who oversees the work of several other agents. These agents are typically less experienced than those who hold the title of Top 10 Agent, which is reserved for the top performers in each office. The meeting in question is an incentive for novice agents as it allows them to gain valuable insights and experience. I typically send one managing agent to the meeting, but if I am unable to find a volunteer, I select one myself. It is noteworthy that Joy never attended a meeting, which initially surprised me. As the meeting progressed, I found myself becoming increasingly irritated. I was perplexed by the apparent discrepancy between the training meetings in Indianapolis that she attends annually and the fact that I had not required all of my managing agents to attend this particular meeting. I had also sent some agents there. What could they possibly learn in 2 weeks? I had left on Sunday and returned on Thursday afternoon. When he spoke, I saw an understanding flash across his face. I should have guessed. They consistently requested 2 weeks of leave and arranged accommodations at an alternative hotel. I inquired about this practice and was informed that the other half of them are my wife's companions. If I divulge this information, I expect no ill consequences for them. Bernie, my wife, has already been harmed. She is currently in a coma, and the perpetrator is likely the individual with whom she communicated. I am skeptical of this claim. He paused, as if he was about to reveal the conclusion. The film portrays individuals capable of almost any action, yet some men are not violent. Bernie, I have always known you to be a courageous individual. If I could obtain answers directly from Joy, I would do so. However, I am unable to do so. I pledge to you that no harm will come to anyone when he informed me of the name of the man he believed Joy was with. I was taken aback when, just an hour after meeting Bernie, my cousin contacted me. On my cell phone, "How are you?" My grandmother disliked my name, Roger. She never explained why, but she refused to call me by my given name. Instead, I shortened my middle name and called it Zach. My family agreed and called me Zach. However, Joy was the only one who did not. She said it was an unworthy name. She also called me an __ as if we were royalty. Hugh usually just called me an __. I figured he must be with someone who was not acquainted with me. Hugh, what are you doing on this disagreeable morning? They called from Vale this morning, and it seems they have discovered who rented the room where Joy was staying. We intend to contact him and extend an invitation for him to come. However, should he decline, we will identify him as a suspect and proceed with an arrest. Might I be present when you speak with Cal? I am confident that Jeb will be informed. Did you inform Cal? Yes, Cal Davis, this morning that I visited. After I had finished informing Joy's superior of the information I had gleaned from Bernie Jigsaw, he commented, "You should have become a police officer. I will contact you when we have arranged an interview." I then spent the following few hours in the hospital meeting with the brain injury team. Part of me was tempted to suggest that she should be confined to a room and left to suffer, but I still lacked sufficient evidence an hour before Joy was brought in. Jim and Yvonne arrived at the hospital. I informed them of my findings. Jim was incredulous that his daughter would act in such a manner. Yvonne implored me to await Joy's recovery before taking any action. I assured her that I would not harm Joy, even if it meant remaining in obscurity for several weeks. Do you believe you can endure this, Yvonne? I am uncertain. It is evident that I cannot trust her anymore. I observed the detrimental impact she had on my father. I have a great deal to contemplate. That is all I can say for now. However, you did take her back once, Yvonne said with a hopeful expression on her face. She is correct. Nevertheless, we were not married and she did not actively deceive me. I replied, and he was also correct. I did not see Joy for 3 weeks after I beat Garrett. By the middle of the second week, she finally stopped. I was contacted by Joy a week later, after I had ceased to respond to her calls. It became apparent that Joy and I had not yet declared our relationship exclusive. It would seem that she was still dating another individual. I did not refer to her as my girlfriend, I simply assumed that we were a couple. However, the fact that she had allowed her father to believe that I had assaulted her was the first and second reason for her calls. I had just returned home from hockey practice. I was eager to take a hot shower and administer ibuprofen. I retrieved my belongings and proceeded up the stairs to my apartment. She was seated in close proximity to my door. I did not respond to your calls, which prompted you to come here. Is there a genuine need for you to be an __? I missed you. You did not miss me. Perhaps I missed you, given that your boyfriend was still in bed. That is why you are still upset about me seeing Garrett. I opened the door. I am most displeased by the fact that you permitted your father to believe that I had laid a hand on you. I entered the room and immediately realized that she had followed me. She opened her mouth to speak, but I promptly returned to the conversation. We never agreed to be exclusive, so I am not upset about you having sex with him. I am, however, angry at myself. For failing to perceive reality accurately, I erroneously assumed that if I engaged in sexual intercourse with a woman, we would continue dating until either of us terminated the relationship. I proceeded to discard my belongings and resume my search for items. From my perspective, we had several productive interactions. You expressed discontent with my refusal to conform to your expectations of me. Specifically, you dislike my refusal to engage in abusive behavior and my lack of interest in pursuing a relationship with you. He then proceeded to beat her in order to satisfy his sexual needs. She may have derived pleasure from the experience, but it is unclear whether she enjoyed it. As a wedding gift, I might send you both brass knuckles. She then adopted a defiant look, which is typically associated with girls who are crying. She then stated that she was finished. She then adopted a look that suggested defiance, which is typically associated with girls who are crying. She then stated that she was done. She then asked why I was still there. I apologize for allowing my father to believe that you had hurt me. However, the first thing I did was cancel our date so that you would not do something. Such an action would result in incarceration for a man of your stature. I neglected to bring my telephone with me when I visited Garrett's. You are under no obligation to provide me with an explanation. I have already informed you that I am no longer interested in pursuing this matter further. You are, however, obliged to listen to me. On that particular afternoon, I went to see Garrett because he was relocating to Wyoming. I am not interested in discussing this further. I am leaving now. I will not engage in sexual intercourse with you again. Garrett inquired as to whether I would accompany him, despite my assertion that I was engaged in an intimate relationship with another individual. When I informed him that I was already involved, he became enraged and pursued me. I sought refuge at the residence of my acquaintance, Julie, and subsequently returned home to contact you, requesting your assistance in avoiding any altercation with Garrett and potential legal ramifications. I had assumed that my father was attending a social gathering at the bowling alley, but he observed me at the entrance. You observed my facial expression and then acknowledged that I was telling the truth. I listened to your account and then suggested that we have a hot shower date. When I initially mentioned the shower, her expression changed from one of amusement to one of despair. I am still uncertain as to what prompted me to suggest that. Would you like to accompany me? I did not have to inquire further, as she readily agreed. That evening, we made the decision to. Our relationship was exclusive for a period of 3 weeks. Thereafter, she took up residence in my apartment. 8 months later, we were married. The only subsequent mention of Garrett was on the occasion when she informed me that he had died in a car accident in Laramie, Wyoming. She went there for his funeral with one of her friends for 2 days. Now, a decade later, Joy is removed from she was transported by ambulance to the intensive care unit at St. Augustine's Hospital. Her condition had significantly improved since her admission to the hospital. Medical professionals expressed optimism about her prognosis. After approximately 30 minutes, we were escorted back to the waiting room. At that time, Hugh sent me a text message informing me that Carl Davis would be arriving for an interview at 4 o'clock. I informed Jim and Yvonne that I had an appointment I was unable to reschedule and departed. Upon returning home, I released Piper from her leash to relieve herself while I donned my suit and tie. I was aware that if Sheriff Jeb Hannibal permitted me to observe the interrogation, I was expected to appear as a detective. I have known the sheriff throughout my life. He and my father collaborated professionally, and I was close friends with his son, Paul. Paul and I engaged in both football and hockey, and we were consistently on the same team until Jeb assumed the role of sheriff and relocated to the northern region. I relocated to a more central area of town to be closer to the office. It was a mutual understanding between Paul and I that we would pursue professional hockey. It is interesting to note that a promise can be broken while one is in college. My father passed away, I lost interest in the game and subsequently dropped out of school. My grandfather and uncle secured me a position as a bricklayer when I was unable to complete my studies in criminal law. 3 National Hockey League teams expressed interest in Paul, however, in his junior season he suffered a broken hip which subsequently stalled his career. Paul accepted a position with the Colorado Springs Police Department and coaches. For us, there was always a choice between pursuing hockey or working in law enforcement. I ultimately chose bricklaying, a trade I still practice today. When I arrived at the sheriff's office, Hugh greeted me. He informed me that Zekeville, a police officer, would be participating via video conference. He advised me to sit in a chair away from the police officer's view. Jeb reminded me not to divulge any information as it might compromise the court case. I understood and agreed. Before I could respond, Jeb added, "I know not to attack that freak you know." He was referring to Nora. I assured him that Nora and I would support him in any way he needed. Upon entering the department, we proceeded down the corridor to the interrogation rooms where several individuals were present. I immediately recognized her, and for a moment, I was transported back in time to high school. I had the same feeling when I saw her then. Catherine Shepard was the most attractive female student in college, even as a freshman. With age, she only became more attractive, becoming even more beautiful than she was when I looked at her during each of our joint classes. I have long dreamed of I had long desired to spend at least one night with her, but I never felt like I was in her league. She was the main cheerleader, queen at the school's graduation party, and college prom queen. She was the epitome of beauty and elegance, accompanied by the starting varsity quarterback. In contrast, I was a hockey outfielder, playing second and third positions. Despite my status as the star of the hockey team, it was not a basketball team with cheerleaders. Our team had its fans, primarily the parents of the players. I was pondering whether she had married a doctor or a lawyer when I was abruptly ushered into the room by two sheriff's deputies. ZQ instructed me to stop drooling and then led me into the room where Sheriff Jeb Hannibal was waiting. He was visibly pleased, his grin indicating his delight. "I've always wanted to do this," he said, retrieving a badge from behind his back. "I'm appointing you as a deputy so that we can say that only law enforcement officers are in the room." He then proceeded to administer the oath and reminded me of the necessity to turn. Before leaving, he even hugged me after he handed me the badge. "I sincerely hope that someday you will receive a diploma and you'll come work for me. Your father was an exemplary police officer, and I am confident that you will emulate him." Hugh and I exited Jeb's office, my shield prominently displayed. My thoughts reverted to Catherine Shepard. At that moment, I recognized that she was beyond my reach, yet I questioned whether I had been the ideal partner in college. She would have turned out to be just as unfaithful, I mused. Nevertheless, I doubted that she would have done so. It is possible that this is partly what made her unattainable for me. Perhaps the men in my family only know how to marry cheaters. I was sure that Daniel would agree with this assumption. We reached the room and went inside. Hugh pointed me to a chair that was not in the camera's direct line of sight. Hugh sat down on a chair at the conference table and began working on the keyboard. Soon, I heard the voice of Detective Phillips and another individual through the speakers. A few minutes later, a sheriff's deputy brought a good, observed the man's demeanor. He exudes the confidence and charisma of a sales professional. This individual is capable of influencing individuals to make significant financial decisions. From an old, unreliable vehicle in a parking lot to a new, expensive automobile that earns him a higher salary, Cal Davis's transformation was striking. Despite never having met Davis in person, I had heard a great deal about him, even when sitting in a room full of police officers. His demeanor was consistently cheerful, as though he were assessing our potential as clients. Prior to this encounter, I had never met Davis, yet I felt as though I had known him for years based on everything Joy had told me about her mentor. Hugh began, "Mr. Davis, we thank you for coming, and I must remind you that this interview is being recorded." "Sure, no problem," Cal replied. "For the record, Detective Hugh McMillan of the El Pozo County Sheriff's Department is present. I am with Detectives Keith Douglas and Roger Riggs." "Roger, is this a character from the movie Lethal Weapon?" "No, it was Martin Riggs, played by Mel Gibson." Roger Tagg was played by. Additionally, Mr. Glover participated in a video conference with Detective Desiree Phillips and Detective Ron Albert from the Vale Police Department. "Mr. Davis, have you been informed of your rights and do you consent to speak with us without legal counsel present?" The investigators proceeded to inquire about the subject's address and other details. I sensed that my intuitive assessment was correct, this was not the perpetrator. While the subject had engaged in sexual intercourse with the victim, he did not inflict physical harm. His demeanor was such that he could persuade a woman to comply with his wishes, yet he did not appear to be the type of individual who would jeopardize his livelihood by being accused of domestic violence. Eventually, we reached the questions I had been anticipating. Detective Phillips' voice then came through the speakers. "Could you please confirm your whereabouts from today until Sunday?" "I was in Houston from Monday to Friday for our company general meeting. I returned home on Friday evening and spent the entire weekend with my wife." "Therefore, you have been at the meeting all week." The tan of his skin had turned white, and there was an expression in his eyes that indicated he was aware of the gravity of the situation. I sensed that he was emotionally distressed when Hugh asked if he would mind waiting a few more minutes while he called Bernie's. Cal said his self-assured demeanor had suddenly dissipated. I was curious to know more, but I was also concerned that my wife might overhear. I observed the subtle shift in Detective Douglas's expression and was impressed by how effortlessly they had manipulated Cal. He eventually disclosed that he had been involved in a romantic relationship with Joy for over 6 years. I estimated that she had initiated their interaction approximately 6 years ago. He exhibited a noticeable change in demeanor when he was informed that this matter pertained to Joy. When he inquired as to whether she was missing or if she had been the victim of foul play, his expression reflected genuine concern. When I inquired about the events that had transpired on Friday, his response was noteworthy. Upon my departure, I received a call from her husband, who informed me that she had won a trip to Ville and was scheduled to fly to Denver in 3 hours. I overheard the conversation, after which we proceeded to Denver, where I dropped her off at the airport terminal. She was merely planning to walk to the arrivals area and await his arrival. I returned home, and my wife can confirm that I have been present throughout the day. Since Friday evening, the detectives had received satisfactory answers to several subsequent questions. Hugh then signed a waiver for bail services and informed Cal that he was free, but warned him not to leave the city for several weeks. Cal then asked Hugh, "You can ask, but I can't guarantee anything." He then requested a few minutes alone with Detective Riggs. Hugh looked at me, and I replied, "I'll listen to him." I then sat down opposite Cal in the chair that Hugh had just vacated. Cal appeared to be depressed and broken, which was a stark contrast to his demeanor earlier. He smiled and said that nothing could ruin his day. The man who had walked into the room just 40 minutes earlier was Roger. He inquired as to whether there was any need for a formal introduction. He seemed to be asking whether there was any need for him to be formally introduced to Joy, who keeps a photo of him in her presentation kit and on her desk in the office. He is infatuated with her. It is evident that he is not aware of this, as if he were, we would not be here. The issue is that I am also infatuated with her, at least 4 weeks a year. I added, in a jocular manner, that I imagine your wife does not hold your love in high regard. I love her, Roger. I love my wife too. She is aware of my infatuation with Joy. Let me begin at the beginning. I recognized that Joy was a unique individual on the day I conducted an interview with her for a position on my team. I felt compelled to provide her with guidance and support, as I had done with other team members. As you are aware, there are instances when individuals are unavailable to attend work-related events. On a particular Saturday, we encountered several instances of no-shows for the scheduled presentation. Consequently, we decided to have lunch as we dined and conversed at an aged restaurant situated adjacent to the military installation. I discerned a profound affinity between us. We ultimately engaged in sexual intercourse at one of the hotels catering to military families. Subsequent to this encounter, we did not engage in sexual intercourse for approximately a month. Both of us experienced feelings of guilt, yet we simultaneously perceived a compelling chemistry that transcended these feelings. I inquired humorously, "It may sound trivial or distasteful to suggest this, but I believe that cheap and tacky are antonyms of what Joy and I have. I am sorry for any distress caused by my actions, which I did not intend to cause. I understand your anger and empathize with your situation, though I cannot fully imagine your feelings. I have no regrets about my love for Joy." I was astonished by the absurdity of this individual's statements. I was convinced that if I struck him, no one would believe that he had tripped and hit his face on the table. However, I was determined to maintain control and to cease concerning myself with Joy. "You have indicated that you do not object to your wife's infidelity. It is already challenging for me to share Joy with you, and this will no longer be an issue. You can take it for yourself, so you will likely end your relationship with her because she is in love with someone else. It is perplexing to hear you express difficulty in sharing and then immediately expect me to do so. I have no desire to interact with you further. At the very least, you would be aware of what you are sharing. I was previously unaware of this, but had I been informed, it is likely that our relationship would not have lasted long, as I do not condone infidelity. It is probable that this is the reason why you and my wife embarked on numerous trips together. She visited Mexico City, San Diego, and Rio de Janeiro, Cabo San Lucas, Corpus Christi, and Miami. My wife was originally scheduled to travel to Estes Park, but the additional travel expenses were deemed excessive. Consequently, we opted to participate in the local program. In the previous year, I had traveled to Miami, which was the only occasion I had left the state. I accompanied her to Ville so that I could confront her about her infidelity. It has come to my attention that you have been engaging in sexual intercourse with her. The meeting was scheduled to last 2 weeks, and the same period was allotted for the independent activities. What is the rationale for including these other cities in the itinerary? Joy and I felt remorse for our actions and thus sought to make amends by offering our spouses vacations. She and I would spend a week of meetings together, and then she would extend an invitation to you to join us at our destination. During the second week, I would return home and spend a week meeting with my wife in Indy. Then, she would go home and I would meet with my wife for a week-long vacation. Joy went away for 2 weeks each time and I only went to Miami. I was aware that the room had been in use for too long for her to only spend one night there. Therefore, if she was not at home with you or any of the places I thought she was taking you, was she cheating on me? This man actually began to weep. Is it true that he was unfaithful to you? I hope you have a pleasant life and say hello to Joy. She is in St. Augustine's Hospital, room 2410. Please tell her father that I will contact him. I proceeded towards the door, but he ceased his advance when he was asked in a querulous tone whether he would divulge the information to his wife. He stated that he did not even know the woman in question and that, even if he did, he would not harm her. He further stated that he would not betray her confidence as he found the prospect of remorse to be an unpleasant experience. One must consider the consequences of one's actions. One day, one will appear before the Almighty to answer for all of this. I turned and left. Hugh was waiting for me in the corridor. I'm sorry, Zeke. I thought we had the guy. Yes, as soon as he walked in, I knew that he was not the one who beat her. I feel foolish. I had been unaware that this was occurring throughout the entire duration of the incident. At that precise moment, I was prevented from observing the situation further by a sudden commotion. Hugh and I turned to see Katrina Shepard physically assaulting Cal. She verbally attacked him, calling him a worthless, cheating son of a __. She then demanded that he cease all contact with Calvin, stating that she no longer wished to see him. She was so distressed that she began to sob loudly as the sheriff's deputy intervened. The deputy intervened and physically separated her from Cal. As they passed us, it was evident that he had sustained multiple injuries from the brief altercation. She approached me, and I was at a loss for words. She embraced me with such intensity that I momentarily lost my breath. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice laden with emotion. It's not your fault or mine. I realized that we both accidentally. I discovered that she had married __. She laughed and pulled away from me. I raised my hand and wiped a tear from her beautiful face. I expressed my hope that everything would be okay with her. I informed her that I had a few days to come to my senses. I extended my best wishes to her as well. She replied, "Roger," kissed me on the cheek, and turned to leave. At that moment, I recognized the officer who was walking with her. Who was walking with her? It was her brother, James. James was 2 grades behind us in school, so I did not know him as such. Suddenly, I understood how she ended up at the sheriff's station that day. I looked at Hugh and said, he has this at home, and he needed to have sex with Joy. Some men just want what they are not. He informed me that I was required to turn in my badge and listen to a lecture on how I could graduate and become a police officer. I had already heard this advice on numerous occasions and, at this point, I was unsure whether I would ever heed it. However, I was aware that I had been listening to a persistent internal voice that had been urging me to pursue this path for some time. Over the past decade, I have been deprived of a significant opportunity. The following days were particularly arduous for me. I spent 2 consecutive Tuesdays searching for a legal counsel who would not facilitate an unfavorable outcome in my divorce proceedings. I did not anticipate engaging in litigation but wished to be adequately prepared. I retained the services of an attorney from a firm in Denver that exclusively represented men in similar cases. In most cases, the fathers fought vigorously to secure the most favorable outcome for themselves. However, in my case, they asserted that they would do their utmost to safeguard my interests. I was immensely relieved to learn this. Joy and I had recently discussed this topic but had not reached a decision. There was not much room for debate. Piper was mine. Furthermore, the house in which we currently reside was previously owned by Grandma Joy. Consequently, I had no intention of attempting to take possession of it. In fact, according to the title deeds, the property in question belongs to my brother, Jim. I inherited my father's house following his death. At that time, I was residing in an apartment while Daniel was living with his wife. They utilized my father's residence and I received a nominal rental fee from them for its use. At the time, Daniel's romantic partner's residence was also occupied by Daniel's former romantic partner. In response, Daniel's family attempted to repossess the property to assuage their distress. Fortunately, I retained the services of a legal professional who successfully defended the property's ownership. The court ruled in my favor, determining that I would have held a majority interest. The family expressed great displeasure at Daniel's decision to pay rent to me, but I retained ownership of the house. I was subsequently gratified to find myself in a position where I was not compelled to relocate to a less desirable apartment. Joy was displeased at my decision to pursue legal action to retain the house, but I informed her that the family in question would never receive the same compensation that my father had paid. In retrospect, I should have considered her cavalier attitude. Late on Tuesday evening, I showed up at the hospital. Jim kept watch, as I expected. He looked up, saw my face, and just shook his head. "How long ago did he ask?" "As far as I can tell, 6 years since she started selling insurance. However, I feel like there's more to it than what we know. There is more to this situation than what we currently know. I am astonished that my daughter could be so deceitful. I would never have married her if I had known that she was a cheater." I proceeded to recount the story that Cal had told me. I had always wondered why she never returned from her trips with photographs. Jim stated that when she was younger, I had noticed that she took pictures every time we went somewhere, even if it was just to Denver. However, I had not considered the possibility that she might have been deceiving me. I informed him that I would no longer visit the hospital. I was unable to bear the thought of talking to her again. He understood my position and suggested that I stay in the house until she was ready to return. I informed him that I would ensure there was no damage and that I had already planned to do so. Furthermore, I stated that I would not submit documents to her until she had recovered. I came to realize that I would miss him and Yvonne, who had treated me as a son throughout my entire time of knowing them. However, I do not hold them responsible for raising a liar and a disgrace. I was engaged in the process of repairing a chimney. In the evening, I attended a hockey match. During the initial period of the game, I was placed in the penalty box as a consequence of my participation in a match that was characterized by aggressive play. 2 minutes into the second period, I was given another penalty, and our coach removed me from the game. The coach was a close associate of Paul's, and thus, he was aware of the reasons behind my participation in the game. The situation was challenging, yet he was also reluctant for me to be expelled from the league upon my return. I was in a disagreeable mood, and we suffered a loss. I was held responsible for allowing my personal issues to impact my performance, yet no one on the team was willing to accept that blame. In fact, several teammates inquired as to whether I would prefer for them to speak with Cal. I did not articulate my refusal of their offer with sufficient clarity when he returned home. Piper was prepared to exit the residence as I observed her traversing the yard. I reminded myself that I needed to examine the fence at Daddy's house while Piper was engaged in her bowel movement. I was on the verge of entering the house when Stephen shouted from the window. I was uncertain as to what he would find on Joy's laptop. I had spent the previous evening looking through our desk to find anything. I looked at all the bills and bank statements I could find and did not find anything out of the ordinary. I was perplexed as to how she was paying for these trips. The only thing I discovered that the only other item of interest was the frequency of her calls to Fiona. Typically, she makes 1 call per month, but as the trips draw closer, the frequency increases to twice per week. I am certain of 2 things: Fiona is aware of more than I am, and she is not sharing this information with me. I have never met this woman, and this fact did not strike me as unusual until this moment. When I attempted to dial upon dialing Fiona's number, I was met with an automated voice informing me that I had reached my voicemail box. I suddenly regretted not having Joy's cell phone. When Stephen entered the house, he appeared to be a child who had discovered where his parents hid their Christmas presents. "What did you find, Steve?" "Bring me a beer. We'll sit down and I'll show you everything." I grabbed a couple of bottles of beer from the refrigerator and we sat down. At the bar, Stephen opened Joy's laptop and turned it on. He then stated, "It is evident that whoever erased the tracks was highly knowledgeable about computers." He proceeded to highlight the presence of several programs on the laptop that he knew had not been installed by Joy. He then added, "I am not offended, Zeke. I am merely pointing out the facts. I am not a computer expert, so I am not offended." He then proceeded to demonstrate how he had found a program that allowed Joy to go online and use the internet without recording her activities. Browser history, including the undeletable even history, was successfully recovered. Fortunately, a colleague from the Department of Defense was available to assist in the investigation. He reviewed relevant materials and identified a significant number of instances where Joy had used the same password for multiple accounts. This suggests that Joy may have been the individual who compiled this data, as she typically uses the same password for all her online activities. The individuals known to Joy who demonstrated a lack of knowledge regarding computers and Fiona's name once again emerged. She was a highly proficient software specialist at a company specializing in defense-related software. What was the purpose of this __S actions? I inquired, my voice devoid of any humor. It appeared that she had accessed the cloaking program for her email and bank accounts, suggesting that this was the means by which she financed her travels. I then proceeded to speculate about the nature of these trips. I informed Stephen of the information I had gleaned from Cal. His eyes grew increasingly larger as I proceeded, and upon my conclusion, he simply stated, "You know, I am unable to divulge to Joe that you possess a badge. He will persistently implore you to don the uniform on his behalf." I was attired in a suit, not the formal attire, and in general, did you peruse these missives? Affirmative. Upon accessing her account, I discovered that several emails had been deleted. However, this information will remain between us. I gained unauthorized access to the mail server and located numerous. The majority of the deleted emails were from loved ones. They contained the typical adolescent banter and insults that one might expect to find in such communications. Several of the emails indicated that the authors planned to meet in person that week. This raises the question of who or what entity was responsible for sending these letters. Some were addressed to the email account of a person named Carl Davis, while others were addressed to the account Cricket4207. The account's owner's name was not revealed, but in one of the emails, the author referred to him as Garrett, son of A__. This is consistent with your previous assertion. Before departing, Stephen demonstrated to me the process of accessing the bank account and email account he had discovered. He retrieved the email and altered the password and security information to prevent unauthorized access to the account. He employed a similar approach with the bank account, which had been opened at a financial institution in Denver under Joy's name. Upon visiting the bank, I was astonished by the substantial balance in the account. It became evident that a considerable sum of money had been raised, exceeding $110. Despite the fact that we were not lacking in financial resources, I remained uncertain as to the source of these funds. Upon examination of the account history, I discovered a series of periodic withdrawals from ATMs that I was aware Joy did not have access to. Additionally, there were several withdrawals made following Joy's hospitalization. All deposits were made at local ATMs. The initial step was to facilitate the transfer of these funds to our joint bank account. Once this was completed, I proceeded to fill out the form on the website to close the account. I was informed that the closure would be carried out at 7 a.m. Monday, March 16, 2020. Subsequently, I updated the contact information on the bank account to my personal email address to ensure I would be informed of any changes. I then sought to gain further insight into Fiona's involvement in the matter, as I was convinced she could provide information regarding the circumstances that led to my wife's demise. Despite my efforts on Facebook, I was unable to uncover any pertinent information. However, I did manage to locate Joy's school albums. Garrett, who had graduated from high school with Joy, reviewed the available records and found no evidence. I then consulted the diary of Joy, a freshman at the same institution, and located the item in question from my senior year. I discovered that Fiona Jimenez was Garrett's sister. I proceeded to contact her. "Hello," I said, addressing the voice on the other end of the line as Detective Phillips. I noted the time and realized it was 1 a.m., and I suddenly felt guilty for calling her Detective Phillips. "This is Roger Rigby." "Detective Rigby, you are mistaken. I was there with Detective McMillan, who forgot to turn off the video. I saw you sitting with Mr. Davis. Actually, Hugh is my cousin, and he is not particularly technologically adept. However, I contacted you to discuss Hugh. I called because I believe I know who attacked my wife. I heard her become more alert and retrieve a writing implement. I informed her about the bank account, omitting how I discovered it and noting that I did not mention the missing debit card from Joy's personal belongings when I retrieved them. I cited stress as the reason. I was unaware that the card was missing. I provided her with a brief description of Garrett and the location where the card had been used that morning. He then apologized for waking her up. "Don't worry about it. It's work-related. You know, you should be a cop," he said. "I hear this all the time." "Well, I'll let you sleep well," she said. "Good night." She wished me good night and hung up. I felt envious, and at the same time time also separated her from her husband. I envied him his ability to listen to that sexy voice during passion. I was also aware that being a police officer, even in a small department like Ville, places a significant strain on a family. Some spouses are able to cope with this, but others, like my mother, find it difficult to bear. I would see Stephen on the porch. On the porch, I inquired of Stephen whether he still had access to the DMV databases and __. "To hell," he replied. "I always have access to databases." "Yes, I know," I responded. "Mr. Hacker Deluxe." I had previously made fun of his nickname in the chat. One day, I went to him to ask something and saw him in the chat under the nickname Hacker Deluxe. This prompted me to I occasionally teased him. I informed him of the name I wished to inquire about and said good night. I was aware that I had made his night by providing him with a rationale for illicitly accessing a location. As soon as I was in my house, I sensed that the day had been arduous and that I required rest. I concurred with this assessment the following morning. I was awakened by the telephone call from my father. The caller ID indicated that the call was from my father. I responded, "Hello, Father." "Good morning, Roger. I hope this message finds you well. I just wanted to let you know that the doctors are tapering off the medications and expect Joy to come around within the next 24 hours. It seems like it's coming soon, doesn't it? I remember the doctor saying that they plan to keep her in a coma for at least a week. However, I believe they were encouraged by the results of some tests. Have you considered allowing her to explain everything and forgive her?" I have not. In fact, I continued to uncover further instances of deceit. It became evident that there was no possibility of reversing the situation. I proceeded to inform him of the entirety of my findings, with the exception of the secret bank account. His reaction was one of displeasure when I revealed the identity of his daughter's secret lover. His voice conveyed a range of negative emotions, including disappointment, devastation, and disgust, as he terminated the call. I did not inform him of my plan to repay Joy for deceiving her. I had just prepared coffee when Stephen entered through the rear entrance. He then proceeded to inquire about the peculiarity of being at my residence at 8 a.m. on a weekday, particularly given that Joe was currently at work. He suggested that I was merely teasing Joe, a notion that I found to be somewhat amusing. I was so overcome with laughter that I nearly spilled my coffee. I then proceeded to ask him to explain the circumstances surrounding the discovery of the secret bank account. When he presented me with the evidence, I was initially taken aback, as though I had fallen into a bizarre alternate reality. At the funeral of Garrett, Joy's statements were revealed to be partially untruthful. She had indicated that she was going to Jimenez, which would have been an accurate representation of her actions. However, she had also stated that she was attending Fiona's funeral. This was later confirmed to be false, as Fiona had died in a car accident in La Rama, and it is highly probable that Joy had accompanied Garrett to the funeral. This was the beginning of the affair. The following information, which I discovered the following year, caused me even greater distress. Garrett was incarcerated at the time, serving a 10-year sentence. He was sentenced to a month in prison for petty theft and served 10 months. He was then required to serve 4 years on parole. His parole agreement prohibited him from leaving Colorado. Therefore, I assumed that if I asked Cal, he would tell him that Joy had insisted on more local sexual encounters until his arrest. Garrett worked for a software development company. However, it is noteworthy that companies related to national defense cannot employ individuals with criminal records. I considered whether the police would apprehend him before he realized his financial resources were limited. Later that day, I contacted my lawyer and informed him of my plan. He responded with mirth and asserted that he could facilitate the necessary arrangements, assuring me that everything would be conducted within the bounds of legality. I was compelled to await Joy's return to a state of rationality. 2 weeks following her emergence from a coma, Joy was permitted to be questioned by the authorities. I proceeded down the hallway in the company of Detective Phillips and Detective Albert, who had been dispatched from Vale to interrogate Joy. Garrett was apprehended when he endeavored to coerce a bank employee into transferring funds that he believed were rightfully his. The card was read, and the cashier's alarm was triggered. She proceeded to inquire with the manager, who corroborated that the card had been reported as stolen. Bank security personnel held the individual until Denver police arrived to take him into custody. During his detention, it was revealed that he was wanted for questioning in Vale. His parole officer expressed interest in his departure from Denver without her approval. Denver was amenable to providing him with guest accommodations. It was my hope that he would have a well. Upon the arrival of Phillips and Albert at Joy's room, I remained in the hallway. Detective Phillips was kind enough to allow me to listen to the conversation. He then inquired if I had any questions for the prisoners. I had a multitude of inquiries, but I decided that they would only ask one. They proceeded to introduce themselves, and I heard Jim inquire as to whether they would prefer for the door to be closed. She explained that, given that they were not detaining Joy, they were unable to allow the door to be locked. However, they had posted a colleague outside the door to prevent eavesdropping. I was attired in a suit. Furthermore, she appeared to be a detective, so it was unlikely that anyone would have considered her presence to be inappropriate. Joy initially seemed reluctant to answer their questions. She denied the allegations repeatedly until they drew her attention to the fact that the receptionist had placed her with 2 different men. One of these was Cal and the other was Garrett. Eventually, she admitted that she had been with both men but was embarrassed to admit that Garrett had beaten her. Then, Phillips played a card that I had not anticipated. I am confident that you are already aware that your husband believes that you have been involved with 2 different men without his knowledge. The information provided may be pertinent to the situation and, upon learning the truth, may prompt him to reconcile with you. However, there is minimal possibility of reconciliation. As Philip revealed her deceit, the truth came to light. She had lied to him to accompany Garrett to his sister's funeral. I empathized with him and recognized that Roger would not have wanted me to approach him directly, just as my father had not. I expressed my regret to him. That weekend, we concluded that our love for each other remained intact. However, I was still enamored with Roger. In response, Garrett proposed that we clandestinely meet with him once a month. I was uncertain about the feasibility of this plan. I was concerned that my actions might cause Roger emotional distress, yet I was compelled to agree. She proceeded to recount the details of her relationship with Cal, emphasizing how it began. She asserted that she was initially attracted to Cal because they were both married when they first met. As their relationship progressed, she decided to address the issue with Cal one week and Garrett the next. I was disconcerted that Roger never accompanied me, and I felt compelled to deceive him about my intentions. This deception, however, merely shifted my focus away from my concerns. Her demeanor and behavior were particularly distressing to me. When she was confronted about the incident involving the beating, she requested leniency with regard to Garrett. That night, I provoked him to the extent that he became enraged. He demanded that I cease taking the pills, asserting that Roger and I should have children. In response, I informed him that, given the circumstances, Roger would be unlikely to believe that the child in question was his. I further suggested that, given the time of day, it was unlikely that anything would occur that evening. He persisted in requesting that I allow him the opportunity to impregnate me, despite my initial request for him to cease these actions. His demeanor abruptly shifted, and I lost consciousness. Upon regaining consciousness, I discovered that Roger believed I had engaged in infidelity and had subsequently departed, leaving me in a state of distress. Phillips, a calculating individual, ultimately corroborated my suspicions, which had arisen upon seeing her secret letter. On a personal note, may I inquire as to the rationale behind the tattoo of Jiminy Cricket on your thigh? This was Garrett's idea, as he believed it would allow him to be with me. At that moment, Roger was unaware of the situation. She had the audacity to address me as baby. I responded by offering her a stack of papers and stating that there was no need for further discussion. I then left the room. I proceeded to the next stage of my life. 5 years have elapsed, and it is widely acknowledged that a telephone call at an inopportune hour is an unfavorable omen for me. It became part of my routine. I conducted the conversation, received the necessary information, and departed. I rolled over and kissed my sleeping wife on the forehead, then, as had become customary, I proceeded to kiss her swollen abdomen. I was aware that she was not fully asleep when I detected her arousal. "You would be well advised to avoid embarking upon a course of action you are unable to complete," she said in a drowsy voice. Even before she became pregnant, I was able to arouse her sexually through kissing her. I was anticipating the arrival of my child. "Sorry, baby. Just kissing Charlie Brown goodbye." She giggled. "Zeke, we haven't even chosen his real name, and you've already given him a nickname." I laughed and then got up and got dressed. I've thought of him as Charlie Brown ever since I found it. The ultrasound revealed that the fetus was male, and the image seemed to show a resemblance to a Charlie Brown shirt, which was a thought that lingered in my mind. I bid my wife, who was still asleep, a pleasant day as I prepared to leave the house. She responded with a muttered remark, which I did not fully comprehend. However, I sensed that her day might be less hectic than usual, given that she was on maternity leave. The day was a month away. 30 minutes later, I arrived at the crime scene. I may not have been in this particular trailer before, but I have been in many similar ones during my time on patrol. The results were no longer surprising to me. 5 years ago, I divorced my wife, Joy. I had assumed that the divorce would be amicable and without any complications, but it turned out that I was deeply mistaken. I declined to engage in conversation with her. Jim had a longer relationship with her when my superior received the financial forms from her. I observed that she did not include her secret account for several weeks. I was curious about the source of funding for this secret account. One day, I encountered Cal Davis unexpectedly. Initially, he attempted to avoid me, but I persisted. I stated that I held no ill will towards him. He informed me that Joy was transferring a considerable amount of money into our joint account, which included commissions from the sales of her and her 3 interns, as well as her bonus checks and commission from policy renewals. He revealed that he had opened a separate account for this purpose. The account was solely for the renewal of policies, which constituted a bonus. He was able to provide me with all of her information. I was able to ascertain the number of bonuses and extensions she had earned after calling our accountant and receiving information from the IRS. I was also contacted by an anonymous hacker who had called me a big jerk when I informed him of my career change. I discovered that Joy had earned over $120 over a 6-year period, and unreported income of $000 was generated. A transfer of just over $30 was made. After discovering this, she was unaware that I was aware of the bill and intended to take advantage of her. I suggested that she divide our account in half and retain her assets. She countered with a 75% share of the total bill, indicating that she was being generous and not seeking half of the inheritance she received during our marriage. My lawyer argued that since given that she was the owner of the house, there was no downside for her in accepting my inheritance. Ultimately, we reached an agreement whereby the joint account would be split 50-50, with her receiving 50% of my business. I hastily signed this agreement and we entered it into the court system. They wrote me a check for precisely half of our total bill plus 50. I then sold my share of the masonry business back to my uncle for the same amount. I compensated him for it, as the instruments had belonged to me prior to our marriage. She was unable to claim any interest in them following the sale of the business. I proceeded to attend college, completed the requisite coursework for a criminal justice degree, and subsequently secured employment with the El Pozo County Sheriff's Department. My legal counsel was aware of my activities and ensured that I adhered to all legal requirements. I even persuaded my uncle to my lawyer wrote me a receipt for $1. Joy's expression indicated satisfaction when she received the check. However, it is probable that her satisfaction was short-lived when she discovered that her secret account had been looted. My accountant employed creative bookkeeping techniques which demonstrated that all the money in the joint account originated from Joy's insurance and my business. I paid all applicable taxes on these funds. I was not obliged to repay her for my education. An anonymous call to the IRS, combined with evidence, led to Joy being audited. I was affected as a result of this, but I was not involved in any wrongdoing. Joy was sentenced to 6 months for tax evasion. In an unexpected turn of events, Garrett was accused of stealing all of her money. He had her bank card, so that the legal system was reluctant to exonerate an individual with a history of failure, and the investigation into the case was cursory. The public defender assigned to represent Garrett was unable to mount a compelling defense, resulting in a conviction for assaulting Joy, revocation of his probation, and additional charges of theft. Consequently, Garrett Jimmy Cricket Jims was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Katrina divorced Cal. Subsequently, I was informed that he relocated to Utah with the intention of commencing anew. Upon her release from incarceration, she secured employment at a telemarketing firm. During her period of imprisonment, I received a disconcerting missive from her. In it, she alleged that I had caused the breakdown of our marriage and misled her and Garrett due to my envy. I promptly discarded the letter and proceeded to move on with my life. When I confided in my acquaintance Paul about the letter, he advised me to confront her about the allegations. He suggested that I should have followed the example of the protagonists in internet stories and sold her to a Mexican brothel. I replied that she would not receive such a punishment because she would enjoy it. I spent my first 3 years in the sheriff's department in a patrol car while CSPD received most of the worst cases. Cases such as burglaries, murders, and drug offenders are more prevalent than domestic violence cases. The only instance in which I drew my service weapon was when I pointed it at my wife, who threatened me with a knife because I had arrested her husband after he had beaten her. That incident occurred 1 year and 6 months ago. It is difficult to comprehend why a woman would return to a man who has been violent towards her. This difficulty is compounded when one visits the scene of the crime and finds a woman who has clearly been beaten to death lying among a pile of empty beer bottles. The forensic experts have already taken all the fingerprints and photographs of the crime scene. It was clear that by the end of the day, the police would have the name of the victim's husband. The woman's boyfriend or lover was in the bedroom with a fractured skull. The situation can be distilled to 2 possibilities: either the wife was unfaithful and her husband was the perpetrator, or the former lover took retribution against her and her new partner. The majority of the morning will be spent examining old patrol reports and consulting with officers who have previously visited the residence. My superior for failing to maintain the confidentiality of a police investigation. I had been employed by the police for approximately a year and a half when a new detective was assigned to work with me. The only information I received from Hugh was that the detective had originated from a region in the north. One evening when I was not on duty, a celebration was held at the bar adjacent to. Upon arriving at our substation, I was taken aback to find Desiree Phillips at the table. We engaged in conversation for a considerable duration that evening. I am aware that 3 or 4 detectives were displeased with the conduct of the patrol officer who was harassing the new detective. However, I believe we had our own narrative. I did not persist in my advances because I assumed she was married. We subsequently became friends, and even after learning that she was singular, I did not pursue any further contact. I was disheartened by the nature of our relationship. We went to dinner and a movie. I did not consider it to be a romantic relationship. He consistently dropped her off at her apartment in a gentlemanly manner. Subsequently, I proceeded to view pornographic material on the internet. One evening, following the completion of a particularly arduous task, I accompanied her to a bar. I abstained from alcohol to ensure her safety. I escorted her to a residence and inquired about her well-being. Subsequently, she requested assistance removing her footwear. I proceeded to help her remove her boots and prepare to depart. "Oh Zek, is there anything else I can do?" I turned to ascertain her needs and was abruptly embraced. "You're intoxicated," she stated. "You foolish individual. She's vulnerable and she's your closest friend. It is imperative that you cease this immediately, lest she develop an irreparable distaste for you." I disengaged from the embrace and, to my surprise, she appeared to have sobered considerably. What could have caused this sudden change? "Zeke, why do you seem disinclined to initiate physical contact? You are inebriated." I am reluctant to become a part of a memory tainted by alcohol, one that could potentially damage our friendship. Secondly, I am unsure if I am prepared to comprehend this unscrupulous individual's actions fully. Has my perspective on women now become irreparably distorted? Did you derive pleasure from our brief encounter? I found it agreeable. You are among the most attractive individuals I have ever encountered. Before I could articulate my thoughts, she urged me to accompany her. I was not inebriated and I did not intend to engage in promiscuous behavior. I have only been with 4 men in my entire life. She later admitted that she liked me from the first minute we met in Ville. She had never dreamed that I would work in the police force when she transferred. She took it as a sign that she was just tired of Vale. That night, 2 of our detectives got jobs in Denver. That was the first of many times we slept together. A year later, we got married. A month later, we became parents. My boss hated the fact that she would need maternity leave. She hounded me at every opportunity for having a child. I would often inform Hugh that Nora could become his godmother, but that he would be disowned as a result. Additionally, he is not pleased with my decision to take a month off from childcare to spend time with my son. As an added benefit, I have been enjoying the films of Desi Love, which depict the experiences of individuals during the Second World War. My circumstances are favorable and I am optimistic that Piper will be able to adapt to her new living arrangements. Her mother and father. I have a strong suspicion that this will occur. Subscribe to our channel to avoid infidelity and other forms of infidelity. Please listen to the next story, which is more intriguing than this one. If you are under 18, do not listen to the next story.